It's time for Culture Shocks with your host, Barry Lynn.
All right, and welcome to today's edition of Culture Shocks. This is Barry Lynn. You know, if you listen to this show or you've listened to it for years or even for a few weeks, even in podcast form, you know that this is not to be mistaken for a place where you get, yesterday's news, or we don't just talk endlessly about what was in your newspapers this morning. If that were the case, this morning we'd probably still be talking about whether Seth MacFarlane was a great Oscar host or a misogynist and racist and all the other terrible things people are debating on other programs. But we don't do that. We mainly try to talk about one topic a day, one big issue a day. How would you solve the question and the problem of world poverty? If you could change the U.S. Constitution, what would you do? Lots of those are big ideas. But arguably the biggest idea of all is one we've never talked about, and frankly, I can't think of anybody who spends much time on talk radio talking about it, and that's the question of why we're here at all. Not why are we listening to this show. I mean, why do we exist? Why do people exist? Why does the universe in which we live, why does that exist? Why, as some philosophers have put it, is there something rather than nothing? And I wanted to find people over the next couple of weeks who had different ideas about the answers to those questions, not so much to debate with them, but to get them to clarify, if it needs clarification, some of these big ideas, and to turn this into a conversation that lay people can understand. You don't have to be a physicist or a mathematician, a philosopher, a theologian, I hope, to get something out of the various answers to this question. We start this little series with William Lane Craig. Professor Craig is research professor of philosophy at the Talbot School of Theology out in California. He is, I think, widely known as one of America's greatest living Christian philosophers. And he had a debate earlier this month at Purdue University. I think the technical title was, "Is Faith in God Reasonable?" It was really a debate about the existence of and the role of a divine force. Dr. Craig, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you, Barry, and thank you for choosing such a serious and interesting topic for your program.
Well, we try, and we're going to try this one. So I guess the first thing we need to do, because you are unabashedly a believer that that the reason we're here, and in that lecture you gave 8 reasons about why God exists, proofs in a sense of why God exists. So you believe in God, but we better figure out what kind of God it is. So who or what is the God you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about a concept of a personal creator and designer of the universe who is the source of moral value. So an unembodied, personal, infinite mind which has brought the universe into being. And this would be a concept of God that would be widely shared by the world's great monotheistic religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and even deism.
Okay, so but it is personal. That, and when you mention deism, because this comes up in discussions of the Constitution that we have quite a bit. When you say deist, I mean, a lot of people would say, "Oh, deist, the great watchmaker, deist, creates the universe and then pretty much goes fishing." But why would you say a deist could also be a personal God? Interested in kind of where you're walking today or what's happening to you.
Classically, the deist authors of the 18th and 19th century did believe in monotheism. That is to say, they were theists. They believed in a personal, intelligent creator and designer of the universe who had promulgated the moral law and to whom human beings were responsible. The sort of God that you see in the Declaration of Independence, referred to as the creator and the source of inalienable human rights. Beyond that, the deists didn't think that God had revealed himself in any special way in the world through holy books or through prophets or incarnations. And so deism is a type of theism, but what they rejected was revealed religion. But they held to what's called natural religion, and that would be something that Christians and Jews and Muslims would also believe in, but they would just go further by thinking there are, in fact, special revelations.
Exactly. Special, often tied to holy text. Now, the other, I guess, presumably important piece of the question of why something exists rather than nothing exists is, are we sure the universe does actually exist? Are we real? Are you and I real? We're having a conversation, but we could be, in a sense, delusional. And, of course, not only in the realm of physics, but sometimes in the realm of philosophy, comes this question, are we actually here? So how can we know for sure the universe exists and it's not a figment of our personal hopes, dreams, imaginations?
Mm-hmm. The question would be, could I be in a virtual reality where I don't actually exist and the things around me are unreal? And I think that while there isn't any way to prove that the existence of the things around you in the external world are real, that it is logically incoherent to deny one's own existence, because the very fact that you would be denying or wondering or doubting your own existence implies that there is someone who's doing the doubting and doing the wondering. And I think this was an insight that the French philosopher René Descartes had that is quite right. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Even if everything around me is illusory, I cannot doubt at least my own existence, because in doubting it, there is someone who is doing the doubting.
Exactly.
So I think at least we can say that I exist, and that is enough, I think, then to generate this question, well, why then does anything at all exist rather than nothing?
Exactly.
I at least exist.
Exactly.
So why is there something rather than nothing?
No. Now, I guess the third preliminary, then we get into the harder stuff. How old is this universe? Let's us acknowledge that it exists. And I think it's an important question. I think you and Descartes together have explained it. But now, how old are we talking here?
The best estimates are around 13.7 billion years old. But I want to make a distinction here for our listeners that I think is very important and is often blurred by people discussing this question. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, doesn't presuppose that the universe had a beginning.
Right.
The existence of an eternally existing universe still raises that question. Why is there an eternally existing universe?
Yes.
Rather than nothing?
Yes.
So the question or the argument based upon the existence of something rather than nothing that was propounded by great philosophers like Gottfried Leibniz assumed that the universe could be eternal in the past. It was no part of that argument to assume that the universe had a beginning. Now, there's a quite different argument for the existence of God, which is based upon the beginning of the universe, and which is predicated on the principle that something cannot come into being out of nothing. That if something comes into existence, then there has to be an already existing cause which brings it into being. And it's extremely important, I think, in these discussions to keep these two arguments distinct, because even if you disagree with one, you could still agree with the other.
Correct.
They don't stand or fall together. And I've defended both of these arguments. I think both the contingency argument for the existence of God propounded by Leibniz, as well as the Kalam cosmological argument, which has an Islamic heritage, are sound arguments for God, but they're quite different arguments.
Indeed, and we're going to find out kind of out of all of the logical possibilities what you, Dr. William Lane Craig, believe, and do you think there is a starting point, Big Bang, metaphysically or physically? We'll get to that in just a minute when we continue this conversation about Mr. Craig's view that there are 8 reasons at least why God is real. We'll be back. All right, we are back, and we're talking in the first of what we hope to be a series of discussions over the next month or so about this fundamental issue. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe exist? Presumably it does, although there is some philosophical debate about that. We're starting out with a theistic view of all of this with a very well-known Christian philosopher, Professor William Lane Craig at the School of Theology in La Mirada, California. So, Dr. Craig, you personally, when all is said and done, you talked about some of the options of the concept of one important question, often confused with other ones, about the start of this universe we know. Do you think there was a Big Bang, a moment at which a divine purpose became explained, exploded into the world in time, in a time that you could, if we were really good at measuring time, we could even pinpoint it?
Yes, I do think that. I think that there are both good philosophical arguments against the infinity of the past, as well as now remarkable scientific evidence that the universe is not infinite in the past, but had an absolute beginning a finite time ago. And so on the basis of both philosophical argument and scientific evidence, I think that the premise that the universe began to exist is more plausibly true than not.
There are people in this business of thinking about this question who would say it looks that way, even scientifically, but maybe the beginnings of this universe, in a sense, are a kind of a pop. You know, you think of popping one of those things that, you know, comes wrapped around the statue you bought in the mail. It kind of pops from another universe into this universe, and we see it, and we say, oh, yeah, it started then, but really we just have failed to notice there's another universe behind it. We've talked to Michio Kaku and other physicists on this show about other topics, but they mention these multiverses, the idea that we only think we are alone. How would you respond to that? Is it at least a rational consideration, or is it nonsense?
Oh, this is a much discussed consideration in contemporary cosmology. There are all sorts of models of the universe that have been proposed to try to avoid the absolute beginning that is featured in the standard Big Bang model. The problem is all of these alternative models have confronted difficulties. They either turn out to be mathematically impossible or to contradict the scientific empirical evidence, so that there is today no viable cosmological model which features an infinite past. This was made very clear by the Tufts University cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin at a conference at Cambridge University last April celebrating the 70th birthday of Stephen Hawking. Vilenkin gave a paper entitled, "Did the Universe Begin to Exist?" And he surveyed all of the contemporary alternatives that try to postulate an infinite past. And what he concluded was that none of these scenarios can actually be past eternal, that all of the evidence, he says, points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. And by that, he's not just talking about our observable universe.
Right.
He means all contiguous space-time reality. So that the theorem that Vilenkin developed together with Alan Guth of MIT and Arvin Bord, a third cosmologist, applies to the multiverse itself. This is what so many physicists fail to tell you. It applies not just to our universe, it applies to the multiverse, and implies that the multiverse itself cannot be past eternal, but must have had a beginning. So I think we've got really very powerful evidence today to think that space-time reality is not past eternal and infinite, but had a beginning.
But do you personally buy the idea that there are so many ways to talk about the multiverse because there's so many different ideas, but it's that there is the possibility, at least, of some kind of parallel And again, some people would say it could be literally next to your nose. Other people say you can't even imagine it except mathematically. But are you open to the possibility that this universe in which we think, at least, what we live, is one of several?
Oh, yes, of course. I think one has to be open to that. The point that I'm making with regard to the question we're discussing today is that even given the existence of a multiverse composed of even an infinite number of other universes, that multiverse itself cannot be past eternal, but had a beginning at some point in the finite past. And therefore, the whole question arises once again that we initially posed: how did the universe or the multiverse come into being? Something cannot come into being out of nothing. There must be a transcendent cause beyond the multiverse, if there is such a thing, which brought it into being.
And which brings
the other point that I would like to make quickly, Barry,
Go ahead.
Even if a multiverse exists, I would also argue it doesn't serve to explain away the remarkable fine-tuning of our universe for intelligent life. So that while I'm very, very open to the existence of a multiverse, I don't think that it does anything to undermine these theistic arguments for the existence of a transcendent creator and designer.
But if this transcendent designer and creator does, in fact, decide to be personally involved in the creation of more than one universe, I mean, why bother? And why, in your view, would that alternate universe or those many alternate universes follow the same mathematical and physical laws that this one does?
Well, that's an open question. In the current models, the multiverse does operate according to the same laws of nature. Otherwise, you're not doing science anymore. You're doing metaphysics. So while these different universes may have different values for the constants and the quantities that are featured in the laws of nature, they are all governed by the same laws of nature, and that's what makes this discussion science rather than philosophy.
You're not throwing philosophy under the table, though, or under a school bus. No. But no, I see where you're going. I think that it remains, and we may not be able to get a full answer. We will not be able to get a full answer out of you to this, but when we come back from a brief break here, we will. If one accepts what you've just said, then this a personal designer, a personal creator, using science in the creation perhaps of more than the universe that we're familiar with, or at least think we're familiar with, kind of why bother to do it twice? Why not just stick with one? And by the way, why did it take so long for us to get, from the beginning, finite beginning, to where we are now? In fact, why did human evolution take this long? Why didn't we just kind of get it right without going through all that random motion that led to so many failures? We'll be back with William Lane Craig talking about this right here on Culture Shocks. I'm Barry Lynn. All right, we are back, and we're talking to Professor William Lane Craig in a series of conversations with people who have, I wouldn't say even they think they have all the answers, but they have answers, fundamental answers at least, to questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? Why do we exist in the first place? And Dr. William Lane Craig is a well-known believer that divinity has something to do with it, that there is a finite start to the universe, God has something to do with it, and in fact, everything to do with it, and that God is operating in a very personal way. So, Professor Craig, here's what, and I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, but there's a whole realm of thinking, and many scientists would agree with this, that the simplest explanation is likely to be the truth. That, in other words, if we get too complicated in explaining something, we probably are, in fact, in the weeds and we're not in the flower garden. But why in the world would a personal God who has some intentionality, wants to do something important, why bother with more than one universe? You're open to the possibility there are more than one. Why go through this process of evolution, particularly when you start to move from single-celled critters all the way to humans? I mean, we had a lot of false starts, a lot of randomness, which I always tell people is not evil. It's just the way things could have happened. Well, why bother if you know what you want? Why don't you get there sooner if you're a personal God?
Right. Now, there are two questions there, Barry, and let me address them separately. The first one would be, why, if God exists, would he create a multiverse? What possible motivation might God have for doing that? Now, remember, I said I'm open to the existence of a multiverse, but as yet I don't see any evidence that there is one. So we're just speculating here as to why God might create one. If there isn't any good reason, maybe that's an argument against a multiverse. But here's a possibility that I could think of. The great intellectual historian Arthur Lovejoy wrote a book called The Great Chain of Being. And in it, he described how medieval theologians felt that the creation had to exhibit all of the fullness of beings possible in order to reflect adequately the infinitude of God's own being. And so that's why there are not only animals and humans, but also angelic beings, higher than humans, but not as great as God. There's this great chain of being descending from God to the lowest inanimate life, because this mirrors and reflects the infinite power and glory of God in the most adequate way. Now, maybe a theist who believes in a multiverse might be motivated by that kind of consideration, to think that a multiverse more adequately mirrors the glory and greatness of God than just a simple single universe.
So, in other words,
in many of those other universes, there could be creatures, intelligent life, who also worship and come to know God and find eternal life. And this might be to bring a plenitude of people into relationship with God. So maybe that would be a motivation.
Yeah, so even if one doesn't accept the idea of angelic beings higher than humans in some energy sense or in some moral sense, not as great as God, they could be existing in some alternate universe.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maybe that's where they exist, in one of these parallel universes.
Now, we've talked a lot about these philosophical reasons, and in the lecture that I talked about that you did at Purdue, the whole notion of eight reasons why God is real. Some of them are philosophical, and we've been talking about those. Some of them get to questions of a slightly different order. One, for example, is God is the best explanation of objective moral values and duties in the world. And I think it was in that lecture, it may have been in something else some of your folks sent us. We all recognize that it's wrong to walk into an elementary school with an automatic weapon and to shoot little boys and girls and their teachers. That's obviously a reference to Newtown, Connecticut. But that sentence is objectively incorrect because there was a shooter, and that shooter is known, and that shooter apparently did not think it was wrong to walk into an elementary school because he did it. Now, how do we explain him?
Well, I think you would say that this person is psychopathic or evil. To say that we recognize the existence of objective right and wrong isn't to say that there are not evil people or people who are mentally ill. I mean, obviously there are. But just as we would not allow the fact that some people are blind and cannot see the physical objects around us to lead us to conclude that therefore there are no physical objects around us, similarly, a person's moral impairment and inability to discern objective moral values shouldn't lead us to deny the objectivity of the moral values that we do clearly see.
Right. Now, you used the phrase imperfection. In this universe created by the personal God you're talking about, where there's everything, where there are plants and animals and birds and maybe there are angels somewhere, not in this universe, in another universe, does that God then have to create imperfections, that is, standard deviations that turn into things that are really terrible, like the Newtown shooting or the use of an atomic weapon?
I don't think we'd want to say that he has to do that. I mean, clearly, a being who is capable of creating and designing this universe, not to speak of a multiverse, could have created a world in which the highest life form was rabbits, say, and therefore there was no moral good and evil, right or wrong. But it is possible that in any world of free agents that God could create that involves this much moral good, that there would also be this much moral evil of one sort or another. And once God chooses to create beings who are autonomous and who have moral freedom, then all bets are off as to how they're going to behave.
Why would that be an intentional decision on the part of God, though, to create beings that could cause so much pain, so much suffering? In this all-powerful divinity that you talk about, one would think, because this God would think, of alternate ways to do things. And one might be, let's make sure that people don't have the freedom, at least to eliminate their fellow beings. Why wouldn't you do that if you wanted to be reasonable as God?
Right. I think that God has to give us moral freedom to make our own moral decisions if we're going to be morally significant agents. And that involves giving us the freedom to do evil. Now, in one sense, our capacities have been limited in the way that you just described, Barry. I don't have the ability, for example, by thinking, to wipe out the population of Lithuania. We are limited in our abilities to bring about certain amounts of evil.
Yeah, well,
so it's not as though there is unlimited ability to do evil, but I do think we have to have genuine freedom to exercise what power we have if we're to be morally significant agents.
Yeah, on the other hand, although you can't think Lithuania away, you could, if you were in a different time and place and had a different inclination, you could attempt to find some of the missing armaments from the old Soviet Union that are floating around in the world arms market, and you could buy them, and then you could do more than think about it. You could try to plant a bomb in the center of the biggest two cities in Lithuania.
Sure, but my point was simply to illustrate that we don't have unlimited power to do evil. Your question initially was, why doesn't God limit us in some way so that we don't have the ability, for example, to kill each other? And what I'm suggesting is that we don't have unlimited ability to do evil. It is within finite parameters. But then given those parameters, he if he wants to have genuine, moral, autonomous agents, he's got to give them the freedom to do things like shoot each other.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna. I'm a little unpersuaded. We're going to go take one more question on that. Then we're going to talk about what the relationship is between the God you believe in, the God of the Christian Bible, and what we've been talking about in a more philosophical way. We'll be back on Culture Shocks. All right, we are talking about why there's something rather than nothing. Why do we exist, and how did we get here, assuming we do exist, with William Lane Craig, well-known Christian philosopher. Some say the best debater of his point of view. We're not really having a debate, but we are trying to get a clarification of a couple of points. God is the best explanation, Dr. Craig, you say, of objective moral values and duties in the world. And objective moral values, one could, if we were having a debate, I might question what an objective moral value is. But let me give you a hypothetical instead. Let's go back to that shooting in a school situation. Would it be wrong in the, quote, objective moral values and duties in the world, would it be wrong if you somehow knew that one child in some school somewhere in the middle of Montana, at the moment, he's just a kid, but he's going to grow up to be a terrorist, and one day he's going to kill 10,000 people in a horrendous biological attack in 2030. Why, if it would it be right or wrong to kill that child, even if you hit a few others now, to save 9,975 people later? Is that a kind of moral equation that the God that you think created us? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a profound question, and it is a question of applied ethics rather than the question that we've been discussing.
Yeah, no,
so
it is,
far.
but it also raises an objective moral
is
question.
To say that it would be wrong to do that. That that the end doesn't justify the means. Otherwise, you get yourself in a situation like the following. Suppose you were to discover that by torturing and sexual abusing a little girl, that this would somehow bring about the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people in the world and would bring world peace and everything like that.
Yep.
Would you then be morally obligated to torture and rape this little girl? That seems crazy.
Well, it does.
So I don't think you can assess the morality of an action simply by its consequences.
No, but you do believe that God is the best explanation of objective moral values. So I assume when you apply your thinking to either of these situations, my or your hypothetical, what's the objective moral value? Is it that people are just can't be trusted enough to make these decisions? Is that what you're getting at?
No. What I'm getting at is that in order for moral values to be valid and binding independently of human opinion, there needs to be something beyond the socio-culturally relative mores that have evolved among Homo sapiens on this planet. There needs to be some kind of a transcendent anchor or plumb line for moral values.
Yeah,
otherwise,
but give me one.
Everything becomes relative.
Yeah, but give me an example of two of these objective moral values that you think are out there. I'm just trying to get, clarification.
The intrinsic value of human beings would be one.
Value of human beings, okay.
Yes, that each person is a bearer of intrinsic moral value and should therefore be treated as an end in himself and not merely as a means to an end. And that would imply, for example, that love is a virtue, that we should love our neighbor rather than seek to do him harm and hate him. Hate is a vice as opposed to a virtue.
No matter how terrible that person is. We're not talking...
Yes. Now, that doesn't obviously mean that you don't seek to punish criminals or stop tyrants, but it is to say that even an Adolf Hitler as a human being is an intrinsically valuable person, and is not just an amoral piece of flesh. He is a human being.
Yeah, but you can't exercise. Again, I don't want to get lost in the weeds. I want to go to one other thing. But if you love humanity in the best sense, not just theoretically, and you see that Hitler and you're Dietrich Bonhoeffer and you're a great moral theologian, and you say, I'm actually going to participate, as he did unsuccessfully, in the assassination of Adolf Hitler. That could be a moral position, or you say it couldn't be because somehow the hate was overshadowing the love?
No. As I said, to say that persons are intrinsically morally valuable is not to say we shouldn't try to stop tyrants or punish criminals who do wrong. Obviously, I think we should. That's what justice is. But it is to say that in different moral situations, there is an objectively right thing to do and an objectively wrong thing to do. And this isn't just a matter of human opinion. There is genuine right and wrong. And in order for that to exist, it seems to me we need a transcendent foundation in God and His commandments.
Now, but the God's commandments, as explained, say, in the Ten Commandments, and there's all kinds of scholarly debate about whether they were added to, taken away from, modified by the life of Jesus. But one of the reasons that you give here for the belief in God is the best explanation of the historical facts about Jesus of Nazareth. If this objective moral truth was so objective, so clear, and so unequivocal, then why didn't Jesus, instead of telling parables and having us try to figure out what they meant, why didn't He just write another, even better moral code? That doesn't make sense.
Jesus was an ethical teacher.
Yeah, He was.
His primary ministry wasn't to teach ethics. He wasn't like the Buddha or something.
No.
New Testament scholars who have investigated the life of Jesus historically are pretty much agreed that the centerpiece of the message of Jesus of Nazareth was the advent of the kingdom of God, that He claimed and believed that in His person the kingdom of God was breaking into human history.
Right.
And His miracles and exorcisms that He carried out were meant to be signs to the people of the inbreaking of God's kingdom,
of course,
in His person. And so the message of Jesus is really about the reign of God among persons, not in a political sense, but in human hearts.
Well, yeah, and of
who
course
are
that was
related to God and submitted to Him.
Yeah, well, and of course that's exactly what the writer of the Pauline letters believed, and he used that phrase about the inbreaking of the Holy Spirit and all of that. Now, something is wrong, because this imminent inbreaking, you can see the signs. We're thousands of years out, and apparently not much has happened. How do you again, with this objective moral truth that's behind all of this as you see it, what went wrong in the last 2,000 years that stopped the breaking? We sew up something? What happened?
Oh, I think that you've got the wrong perspective here, Barry. I think when you look back at 2,000 years of Christian history, the remarkable thing about it is what went right. Here is a movement that had ignominious beginnings in the 3-year ministry of a hillbilly preacher from Galilee with 12 people who went out into the Mediterranean world. And in the course of 20 centuries, this movement has filled every corner of the globe and has shaped the history of human life on earth in a way that no other force has done so. It has been responsible for the university system, the founding of universities, for modern nursing, the abolition of slavery, for the founding of hospitals and leprosy clinics, for art and literature. The impact of Christianity upon the world is just incalculable. And so I see this as an incredible story that cannot be compared to any other movement in the history of mankind.
Now, I guess you're right. I do see things a little differently. If I started with the premise that from kind of the year 30 to the year roughly 90, when you create the canon of what the Bible is, if there were obvious signs and miracles, not just in the sense of, well, penicillin is a miracle drug, but real miracles, and then we kind of have this long hiatus. I get what you're saying. I understand the point. You look around and you see things that are signs of the contribution of, as you put it, the teachings of a hillbilly preacher gone well, in your view, more times than not. Hey, I want to thank you, Professor Craig. I hope you've enjoyed having a little chat about this.
I certainly have, Barry, and I hope that any listeners who want to learn more will go to our website, reasonablefaith.org, and look at the many materials that are all available.
Terrific.
There.
That's reasonablefaith.org. William Lane Craig, it's a pleasure talking to you, and that does it for today's edition of Culture Shocks. I'm Barry Lynn. We'll talk again.
This edition of Culture Shocks has been produced by Diane Robinson, engineered by Dwayne Davis, and the Genesis Communication Network technical staff. Visit us online at cultureshocks.com.